The first time I knew my wife had left me, she was still living in my house. It was not something she said. Nora was careful with words. She always had been. She knew how to place them so they looked harmless after the fact. If you held one up to the light a day later, it would still seem innocent. That was one of the things I loved about her when we were young. It made her seem calm, measured, safe. I understood much later that restraint and mercy are not the same thing. The moment came on a Thursday in late October, in the ballroom of the old hotel my mother had kept alive with her hands and her spine and most of her life. The Rowan House has stood on Whitaker Square in Savannah for 92 years. White facade, green shutters, 12 iron balconies across the front. 38 rooms, a narrow brick courtyard with lemon trees in clay pots, and a ballroom on the second floor with chandeliers my mother insisted on rewiring instead of replacing because, in her words, old things deserve one honest attempt before you throw them away. We were hosting a preservation dinner that night. City people, donors, a judge and his wife, 2 real estate men pretending not to be real estate men. My younger brother, Adrian, had arranged half the guest list without asking me, which was already an answer to a question I had not yet forced myself to ask. I was standing near the bar when I looked across the room and saw Nora laugh at something Adrian said. Not the laugh itself, the hand. Her hand rested on his sleeve a moment too long. Not enough for anyone else to notice. More than enough for me. He leaned toward her in the easy, proprietary way men do when they have mistaken another man's life for available property. She looked up at him, and in that one brief exchange, I saw 2 things clearly. The first was that they had become intimate in ways neither of them believed I could see. The second was that whatever I had lost had not been lost in a moment. It had been taken slowly, professionally, right under my nose, while I was downstairs balancing invoices and arguing with suppliers and telling myself I was keeping the family afloat. I did not make a scene. I shook hands. I thanked donors. I smiled through dessert. Then I went up to the roof after midnight and stood under the cooling October sky looking down at the square while the city made its small, dark noises around me. Adrian came up there 10 minutes later. He had a tumbler in his hand. Bourbon. My father's brand, though Adrian never liked it until our father died. "Good room tonight," he said. I looked at the hotel across the roofline, not at him. It was. He stood beside me, comfortable in my silence. He had always been comfortable in spaces he did not build. "You should let me help more," he said. "You're carrying too much." I said nothing. He took that for invitation. "We can't keep running this place like it's 1989, he said. "There are offers on the table, serious offers. The market is right. If we move now, we all walk away well." We all. He had started saying that 6 months earlier. When Adrian came back from Miami after his latest collapse, it was temporary. That was how he framed it. He needed a place to land, needed a little time, needed family. He was 42 then, handsome in the way weak men often are, still carrying the face that had gotten him forgiven too many times too early. He had burned through a condo, 2 business partners, 1 fiancée, and most of our late father's patience before he finally ran out of people who believed in his next version of himself. I let him stay. That was my first mistake. My second was believing Nora's relief when he arrived had anything to do with family. At first she said what anyone would have said, that it was good to have more help, that I had been stretched too thin since my mother's stroke, that Adrian had charm I did not, and charm in the hotel business was not nothing. All of that was true. I have never been charming. I am 51 years old. I wake early. I speak plainly. I do not know how to turn a room toward me and have never wanted to learn. My wife used to say I was the kind of man people trusted because he looked like he had no time to perform. I believed that was praise. Now I'm not sure. The truth is that the hotel had been bleeding quietly for 3 years. A storm took the west porch in 2021. Insurance covered less than it should have. Then interest rates rose. Then corporate chains opened 2 glossy places within walking distance of the square. We still filled rooms most weekends, still hosted weddings and retirement dinners and small legal conferences, but it was no longer enough to keep old wood, old plumbing, old roofs, old payroll, and old pride going in the same direction. I worked more. That was what I knew how to do. Nora grew lonelier. That was what I failed to see. My daughter, Ellie, saw it before I did. Ellie was 22 then, in Charleston finishing her architecture degree. She came home less often than either of us wanted, which is how it goes when children do exactly what you raised them to do and then leave you with the consequences of your competence. She had her mother's mouth and my mother's eyes, sharp in both directions. At Christmas, she stood with me in the pantry while I was looking for extra champagne flutes and said, "Something's off here." With what? With Mom and Uncle Adrian. I set down the glasses. What do you mean? She hesitated, which told me she had seen more than she wanted to say. Maybe nothing, she said. I just don't like the way he talks about you when you're not around. How? Like you're already gone, she said. I laughed then, not because it was funny, because some warnings arrive before we have the courage to deserve them. By February, Adrian had inserted himself into everything: vendor negotiations, marketing plans, payroll suggestions, wine list changes. He started calling certain rooms by their square footage instead of their names. Magnolia Suite became the East Corner asset. The ballroom became event capacity. He was always translating memory into commodity and acting like that was sophistication. Nora defended him every time I objected. He's trying to help. He sees things you don't. You're so emotional about this place that you can't think clearly. She was right about the emotion, not about the clarity. My mother died the previous spring. Eleanor Rowan did not trust sentimentality. She trusted ledgers, lemon oil on banisters, and showing up before sunrise if the people you paid were paid to show up by 7. When she was dying, she called me to the hospital window one afternoon and said, "If you ever sell this house, do not sell it because you're tired. Tired men make permanent bargains with temporary grief." I promised her I wouldn't. Adrian knew that. Nora knew it too. That promise became, in their mouths, evidence that I was irrational. In March, a firm out of Atlanta made a formal offer for the hotel. A hospitality group with a neat name and soulless shoes. They wanted to reposition the asset, which meant strip the old rooms, turn the courtyard into a private club, and hang enough brass and velvet over the wound that nobody would say the word mutilation out loud. The number they offered would have changed all our lives. Debt cleared, cash in the bank. Ellie's graduate school paid for twice over. Nora sat across from me in the library while I read the proposal and said very softly, "Maybe this is mercy." I looked up at her. For who? For all of us. There it was. Not the hotel. Us. As if the building had become the obstacle between my wife and whatever life she had already started rehearsing in private. I said no. Adrian took that badly in the particular way cowards do. Not rage, injury, a long performance of disappointment. "You're not protecting a legacy," he told me 3 days later in my office. "You're preserving your own identity because you don't know who you'd be without this place." That one landed because it was close enough to true to sting, but he kept talking. "And while you're doing that," he said, "the rest of us are supposed to what? Wait? Pretend your grief is a business strategy?" The rest of us. Again. I stood up. "Get out of my office." He smiled as if I had proven something for him and left without hurry. That spring, the invoices began to feel wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not criminal in the clean, obvious way people imagine theft looking. Just off. A landscaping charge that was double what we usually paid. A lighting consultant I had never approved. 3 separate invoices from a maintenance company I did not know. I asked Nora about them. She handled accounts receivable and most of the vendor paperwork. Had for years. They're from Adrian's contacts, she said. He's been bringing in people who can actually modernize the place. Why didn't I approve them? Because if you had to approve everything, nothing would happen. We fought that night. Quietly. Savage in tone, if not in volume. At one point she said, "You have made this place into a religion and yourself into its last priest." I remember the sentence because it was too elegant to have been spontaneous. She had been thinking it for a while, maybe saying it to him first. By June, I knew about the affair, not because I caught them in bed. Life is rarely kind enough to make betrayal that easy to categorize. I knew because one afternoon I came back early from a meeting with the bank and saw Adrian cross the inner courtyard toward the stairwell to the private rooms. He looked relaxed, too relaxed. A man leaving someplace he has no right to leave from and fully expects never to be questioned. 10 minutes later, Nora came down the same stairs wearing different lipstick from the color she had left the house in that morning. There are moments when humiliation is so pure it clears the head. That was one of them. I did not confront either of them. Not yet. I went into my office and shut the door and sat there until dusk. At some point, our longtime bookkeeper, Mrs. Bell, knocked once and came in carrying the weekly receipts. She had worked for my mother before me and had the kind of loyalty that comes from being too old for performance and too competent for nonsense. She set the folder down and looked at me for a moment. "Something wrong?" she asked. "No." She kept looking. Then she said, "Those maintenance invoices are garbage." I raised my head. "What?" "That company Adrian hired," she said. "Larkshore Facilities. I called the number because one of their routing details changed. It forwards to a private mobile, no office, no receptionist, and the tax ID on 2 invoices doesn't match the one on the others." I sat up fully then. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I told your wife last month," Mrs. Bell said, "and she told me Adrian was streamlining things and that I was being territorial. I've been called worse, but I don't enjoy being called stupid." After she left, I closed the door again and pulled every invoice from Larkshore for the past 8 months. $73,000. Not enough to sink us. Enough to be deliberate. Enough to tell a story. The next morning, I called an old friend of mine named Ezra Gant. Ezra had been our family attorney once, before retirement had softened him around the edges without making him less sharp. He was one of the few men left in Savannah who had known my parents before the hotel became a marketable fantasy to out-of-town buyers. I asked him for 2 things: discretion and a forensic accountant he trusted. For the next 3 weeks, I said almost nothing. That was the first act of revenge, though I did not name it that at the time. Silence. Letting them believe the ground beneath them was still theirs. The accountant's name was Mira Sloan. Efficient, 40-ish, unsentimental. She wore flat shoes and spoke like someone who billed honestly by the hour and expected others to respect the same principle. Within 10 days, she found what I had half expected and half dreaded. Larkshore Facilities did not meaningfully exist. It was a shell. The account receiving the hotel's payments was routed through an LLC formed 9 months earlier. The managing member of that LLC was Adrian. A smaller set of transfers, consulting fees, design retainers, market positioning services, had then moved out from there into a separate account tied to a private trust. Nora was the trustee. I sat in Mira's office with those papers in front of me and did not feel anger first. I felt exhaustion, not surprise, not heartbreak, just a deep and finished tiredness. It is one thing to suspect your wife of leaving you in her heart. It is another to discover she has been invoicing the process. I went home that evening and found Nora on the back veranda with a glass of white wine, reading emails on her phone. The light was low and summer soft. The kind of evening that used to make me think even difficult marriages might still survive if left long enough in warm weather. She looked up. "You're late." "I was with a lawyer." That made her still. Then she smiled. "A lawyer?" "Yes." "For what?" I looked at her carefully. I could have told her then. Could have put the papers on the table between us and watched the blood leave her face. Instead, I said, "The hotel." And I saw relief pass through her so quickly it almost vanished before it fully formed. "You're finally thinking clearly," she said. That was the moment, I think, when revenge ceased to be an abstract possibility and became something with structure. Not because of the theft, not even because of Adrian, because of her relief, because my surrender would have pleased her more than my pain troubled her. I let the silence sit just long enough. Then I said, "Maybe." She reached for my hand. I let her. It felt colder than it should have. "Thomas," she said, "you don't have to carry all of this alone anymore." I almost laughed. Instead, I said, "No, I suppose I don't." The next week, Ezra called me to his office and handed me an envelope in my mother's handwriting. I recognized it immediately. Eleanor Rowan wrote like someone carving wood, each letter deliberate, upright, unapologetic. "What is this?" "She left it with me," Ezra said. "Instructions were clear. If the hotel was ever threatened with sale outside the family, and if she was no longer alive, I was to give it to you." Inside was a letter and a copy of an amended trust document from 11 years earlier. I read the letter twice before I fully understood it. My mother, in her infinite suspicion of both markets and men, had quietly restructured ownership after my father's death. The majority controlling interest remained with me while she lived, but upon her death, a preservation clause activated. Any sale or conversion outside family lodging use required not only my signature, but that of Ellie as secondary beneficiary once she turned 21. Ellie had turned 21 the previous November. Nora did not know this. Adrian certainly did not. They had been planning a sale around authority they assumed I held alone. My mother had built a lock into the walls long before either of them tried the door. I sat with the papers in my lap and felt, for the first time in months, something like calm. Not joy. Joy would have been too clean. But calm, yes. My mother had not merely loved me. She had prepared for me. I called Ellie that night. She answered from Charleston, breathless, walking somewhere. "Dad? I need you home." There was a pause. "What happened?" I looked across the darkened kitchen toward the dining room where Nora and Adrian were laughing softly over wine, as though the house already belonged to some future version of them. "Everything," I said. Ellie came down 2 days later. I picked her up from the station myself. In the car, I told her enough to be honest, and not enough to turn the drive into a wound. She listened, did not interrupt. When I finished, she looked out the window for a long time at the humid July streets passing by. Then she said, "I hated him before I had proof." "Your mother?" She was quiet a moment. "Both of them," she said. At home, Nora kissed Ellie on the cheek and asked about Charleston, as if nothing in the structure of the family had shifted. Adrian arrived for dinner with bourbon and an easy grin and clapped Ellie on the shoulder like he hadn't been helping dismantle the house she grew up in. I watched all of it. I said very little. That was the second act of revenge. Patience. Letting the rope remain slack until the weight on the other end forgot it was attached to anything. In August, Adrian announced that Marwick Hospitality, the Atlanta group, was prepared to move forward if I agreed to a formal presentation during the hotel's Founders Weekend in September. "It's perfect timing," he said over breakfast. "The Centennial Campaign crowd will already be here. Investors, preservation people, press. We position it as stewardship, not a sale. Stewardship." He said it looking straight at me. I almost admired the nerve. Nora placed a hand over mine under the table. A little signal for the room. the faithful wife standing by a difficult husband as he finally accepted progress. "We should do it," she said. I looked at both of them and said, "All right." Adrian blinked once. Nora's fingers tightened over mine before she remembered herself and let go. "You mean that?" she asked. "I'm tired," I said. "Maybe you were right. Tired men make permanent bargains with temporary grief." My mother's voice moved through me so clearly in that moment that I nearly smiled. Adrian stood up and poured himself more coffee like a man already inhabiting his promotion. "What changed your mind?" "Ellie," I said. "Future. Practicality. Pick one." He laughed. Nora did too. It sounded to me like glass beginning to crack. For the next 3 weeks, the hotel became a stage set for my own disappearance. Adrian organized meetings. Nora reviewed draft documents. Marwick's team toured rooms and took notes in leather folders. They praised the bones, praised the market, praised the emotional authenticity of the property, which is what men say when they want credit for sensing what they intend to destroy. I signed nothing. Whenever papers appeared, I said I wanted to review them after the gala, once terms were final. That suited Adrian fine. He thought the announcement itself would make the rest inevitable. Meanwhile, Ezra drafted trust transfer documents. Mira assembled a report. Ellie met privately with the Savannah Preservation Council and signed her consent for a protective easement over the facade, ballroom, and courtyard, binding enough to make Marwick's planned conversion worthless. I also met quietly with Marwick's senior partner. His name was Leonard Voss. He was younger than me, well-barbered, and old in the eyes. I showed him the forensic summary. Not all of it. Enough. "The vendor structure you were pitched," I told him, "includes self-dealing, concealed routing, and a forged assumption of management authority. I imagine your compliance department will know what to do with that." He read in silence. Then he asked, "Does your wife know you have this?" "I don't know what my wife knows anymore." He set the papers down. "This changes things." "Yes," I said. "It does. What do you want from me?" "Very little," I told him. "Come to the gala. Smile. Say nothing before I do." He studied me a moment, then nodded. I think he understood what I was offering him: an exit with dignity, and the chance to avoid being publicly attached to people already beginning to sink. Founders Weekend arrived hot and gold and deceptive. The city was full of tourists and wedding guests and the usual late summer softness that makes Savannah look like a place where bad things happen slowly enough to be forgiven. The gala was held Saturday night in the ballroom. Nora wore black silk and my mother's emerald earrings. That hurt more than I expected. Adrian wore a midnight blue tuxedo and the confidence of a man who had rehearsed his victory too many times to imagine interruption. Ellie stood beside me in a pale gray dress, one hand resting lightly against my arm. "You all right?" she asked. "No," I said. She nodded. "Good. Means you're awake." At 8:30 the room was full. Bankers, donors, city board members, Marwick executives, a local magazine editor, 2 cousins who came to everything so they could carry family information back into the wider bloodstream. Nora moved through the crowd beautifully. She had always been good in rooms like that, better than I ever was. Watching her laugh and greet and glide between tables, I understood how easy it is to confuse grace with goodness when you love someone. Dinner was served. Toasts began. Adrian spoke first. He thanked the city, thanked our family, thanked my late parents by name. Thanked me, generously, for carrying the burden of memory long enough to bring us to a future built on courage. He was good. That was the worst of it. Not because I doubted he was a liar, because he had become one so elegantly. When he finished, the room applauded. He turned to me with a smile meant for witnesses and said, "Tom, I think the next words belong to you." I stood. The ballroom settled. I looked up at the chandeliers my mother had saved. At the walls, she had painted twice herself because she never liked the contractor's finish. At the parquet floor my father danced on once a year at the Christmas staff dinner and nowhere else. Then I looked at my wife, then at my brother. Nora gave me the faintest encouraging nod. Adrian lifted his glass. I set mine down. When my mother left me this hotel, I said, she also left me a warning. The room quieted further. She said tired men make permanent bargains with temporary grief. A few people smiled politely, unsure where the line was heading. I went on. For the past year, I have been encouraged by people close to me to sell this place. I have been told it is practical, merciful, forward-looking. I have been told it is what family requires. I saw the first change then, not in the audience, in Nora, just a slight tightening around the mouth. And for a while, I said, I considered it. I am, after all, a tired man. A little laugh in the room. Then I said, but before making that decision, I thought it wise to review our books. Adrian did not move. That, more than anything, told me he still believed the performance could be controlled. I took the folder Ezra had placed beneath the podium 20 minutes earlier. Inside were copies. Not for everyone, only for the people who mattered. Those books, I said, told an interesting story about maintenance vendors that do not exist, consulting arrangements concealed through private entities, and hotel funds routed into accounts controlled by my brother Adrian Rowan and my wife Nora Rowan. No one laughed then. The ballroom went very still in the way only wealthy rooms can. People trained by money not to show surprise until they have confirmed who else has permission to feel it. Adrian set down his glass. Thomas, he said, smiling as though I were confused, this is not the place. No, I said. It is exactly the place. You wanted witnesses. Nora stood. Her face had lost all color. Sit down, she said softly. I looked at her. No. I turned toward the Marwick table. Mr. Voss has already reviewed enough of the forensic findings to withdraw his firm's interest. I appreciate his discretion in waiting until tonight. Leonard Voss inclined his head once. He did not look at Adrian. I continued. There will be no sale. That landed visibly. Adrian's expression broke first, then hardened. You don't get to do this, he said. I do, I told him. Quite literally. My mother anticipated the possibility that one or more of her children might try to convert this place into a transaction. She amended the trust 11 years ago. Any sale requires not only my signature, but Ellie's. A murmur moved through the room. Ellie stood beside me then, calm, straight-backed. Not her mother's daughter in that moment. Mine, and my mother's. I placed one hand lightly against her shoulder. Ellie has declined. The silence after that was almost beautiful. Additionally, I said, effective tonight, the Rowan House enters a preservation trust with an easement protecting its historic use. There will be no private club, no conversion, no asset repositioning. This house remains what it has been. Then I looked directly at Adrian. As for you, your access to hotel accounts was revoked at 6 o'clock. Your room keys stop working at midnight. Mrs. Bell has already informed payroll and vendor relations. Mira Sloan's full report goes to the district attorney Monday morning unless counsel advises otherwise. He took one step toward me. For a moment, I thought he might actually hit me, which would have simplified the room in a way I almost welcomed. Instead, he stopped himself and said too loudly, "You sanctimonious bastard." Maybe he meant it to wound. It didn't. It sounded in that room like confession. Nora had not moved. She was looking at me in a way I had never seen before. Not with love, not even with hatred, with calculation failing in real time. You set this up, she said. Yes. In front of Ellie? That one almost moved me. The instinct to frame herself as mother even now. I answered honestly. No. You set it up in front of Ellie. I'm just ending it. Her face changed at that. I think it was the first true expression she had shown all night, something like shame, or maybe only the insult of being seen clearly. Adrian laughed once under his breath, a strange, broken sound. "All this over money?" he asked. I looked at him. "No," I said. "Money is just how you chose to measure what I was worth." Then I stepped away from the podium. That was all. No theatrics, no police entering the ballroom, no shattered glass. Just the quiet destruction of two people who had mistaken my silence for incapacity. The rest of the evening happened in fragments. People leaving early. Mrs. Bell directing staff with the serene efficiency of a woman who had waited all her life to be proven right in public. Leonard Voss shaking my hand once and saying, "You handled that cleanly." Ezra appearing at my elbow like a man who had attended funerals long enough to know when one had just ended. Nora found me in the library near midnight. The ballroom had emptied. Staff were clearing glasses upstairs. The music was gone. She closed the door behind her. For a moment, we simply stood there among the books and old photographs and the smell of wax polish and paper. Then she said, "Was that revenge?" I thought about it. About the months of silence. About the patience. About the documents prepared in quiet rooms while she slept in my bed and planned my replacement over breakfast. "Yes," I said. "Partly." She nodded once, as if honesty was the last courtesy available to us. "I did love you," she said. That hurt more than I expected because I believed her. Love is not the opposite of betrayal. Indifference is. Love can live next to betrayal for years if ambition keeps feeding it excuses. "I know," I said. Tears stood in her eyes then, though they did not fall. "I didn't mean for it to become this." That sentence is the anthem of weak people. I almost told her that. Instead, I said, "It already was." She left before 1. A driver took her to a condo downtown she had apparently rented 6 weeks earlier. That detail did not surprise me. It only gave shape to what I had refused to map. Adrian lasted longer. He pounded on my office door at 1:30, drunk and furious, and suddenly younger than he had looked in years. "You think you won," he said. I let him talk. "You think because you embarrassed me in your mother's ballroom that you've done something noble." I said nothing. He stepped closer. "She chose me too, you know." There it was. The last little knife. Not necessary. That was how I knew he had lost. Men who are winning do not reach for pettiness. Men who are sinking do. I looked at him for a long time and then said, "Get out of my house." He stared at me. Then he laughed once, softly. "That's the problem, Tom. It's never just a house to you." "No," I said, "and that's why you'll never understand what you tried to steal." He was gone by dawn. The months after that were not triumphant. I wish I could tell you revenge tasted clean. It didn't. It tasted like paperwork and empty rooms, like legal meetings, like Ellie crying once in the laundry room where she thought I could not hear her, like divorce filings signed in black ink with a hand steadier than my chest felt. The district attorney declined criminal charges in the end. Civil exposure and repayment negotiations were judged more efficient than a messy public fraud case without broader victims. Adrian settled through counsel, sold what little he had left, disappeared to Dallas, then Phoenix, then I stopped tracking. Nora and I divorced quietly. No screaming, no dramatic courtroom. Just a woman I had once loved sitting across from me in mediated offices discussing furniture, accounts, and timelines as if 17 years of marriage had been a jointly owned business already halfway liquidated. She asked for very little. I think she understood that asking for more would have required a version of herself she could no longer convincingly perform. Ellie moved back to Savannah for a year. She took over the restoration plan for the West Porch as her first real project after graduate school. Watching her work from scaffolding in old jeans with rolled drawings under one arm and pencil tucked into her hair, I sometimes felt my mother so strongly in the courtyard that I would turn, half expecting to see her in the kitchen door with a dish towel over one shoulder, ready to criticize the paint choice and then fix it herself. The hotel survived. Not elegantly. Survival rarely is. We cut costs, rented the ballroom for fewer but better events, turned 3 underused suites into long-stay artist residencies in winter, stopped pretending every old room needed to appeal to every new taste. People came because the place still felt true. That turned out to be worth more than Adrian ever understood. Sometimes, late, I still walk the second-floor hallway after the guests are asleep. Old hotels make noises like ships, pipes, wood, settling, quiet labor hidden inside stillness. There are nights when I think about Nora in the early years before ambition or disappointment got between us. How she used to bring me coffee at the front desk during December weddings. How she leaned against the kitchen doorway laughing while I burned biscuits on our first anniversary because I thought effort could substitute for skill. I do not hate her. That would be easier. Hatred has energy. What I feel is heavier and less dramatic. A kind of finished sorrow. Adrian, I confess, is different. I do not think about him often, but when I do, I feel something closer to absence than grief. He spent his whole life mistaking access for entitlement. By the time he realized some doors close quietly and forever, he had already taught everyone who loved him how to turn the key. Ellie asked me once, almost a year after the gala, whether I regretted doing it the way I did. We were on the roof in October, same place Adrian had stood beside me the year before. The square below was strung with lights for a wedding. Somewhere in the courtyard, a band was playing softly for people I did not know. "No," I said. She waited. Then I added, "I regret that I needed to." She nodded. "That sounds right." After a while, she said, "You know Mom still tells people you humiliated her." I looked out over Savannah. "I did." Ellie was quiet for a minute. "Did it help?" That was the right question. Not whether it was justified, not whether they deserved it, whether it helped. I thought about the ballroom, the silence, the look on Nora's face, the way Adrian's confidence collapsed inward like cheap plaster once the support behind it was removed. I thought about my mother's letter, my daughter's hand on my arm, the hotel still standing, and the cost of all of it. "Yes," I said at last. "And no." Ellie smiled sadly. "That sounds right, too." The wedding downstairs ended around 11. Guests drifted out into the square in their evening clothes, laughing with the carelessness of people who have not yet learned how expensive certain nights become later. I stood there beside my daughter under the Savannah sky and listened to the house breathe around us. Old things deserve one honest attempt before you throw them away. My mother said that about chandeliers. I used to think she meant objects. Now I think she meant people too. But she also knew the limit. Some things can be repaired, others can only be revealed, accounted for, and left behind before they take the rest of the structure down with them. That was the part of her I inherited most completely, not the sentiment, the judgment. And if there is any peace in that, it is not the bright kind. It is quieter. A room kept standing. A name not sold. A daughter still willing to come home. For a man like me, that is enough.